Okay, so where did you start? Hi, everyone. So my name is María Muñoz Boudet. I'm a senior social scientist with the Poverty and Equity Global Practice. And I'm chairing this session that is called Inequality Dynamics, but I think we're going to talk a lot about gender and migration, which is great. So if you've been here since the beginning, you know the drill. Everybody gets 10 to 12 minutes, and then we get 5 minutes to ask them questions. And I'm probably going to butcher all the names, so apologies in advance. Let's go to the first paper, which is Hidden in Plain Sight, Asymmetric Information and Hidden Income Within the Household by Sally Zhang, who's a PhD student at Stanford University. Sally, you have 10 minutes.
Great.
Well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sally. I am a development and labor economist who studies economics of the household and gender in developing countries. And thank you so much for the invitation to speak here and to present to you my job market paper, Hidden in Plain Sight, Asymmetric Information and Hidden Income Within the Household. So we know that asymmetric information has long been an important topic in economics, and there has been a large literature studying topics of asymmetric information in principal-agent relationships between households as well as between migrants and migrant-sending families. However, we have very limited evidence of asymmetric information within the household. Why is that the case? For one, you may think that asymmetric information is not a problem in the household. Indeed, if you're familiar with the common economic models of households, they typically assume that household income is common knowledge to all its members. However, such view of the household may not be accurate. For example, let's look at some quotes from focus groups that I did in Western Kenya. A husband says, "I will keep my income as a secret because I cover 85% of the household budget, and also my wife keeps her income as her secret." A wife says, "When my husband knows the exact amount of income that I earn, he will reduce the amount he leaves for household expenditures." Another wife says, "Some women do hide because they want to have financial independence. They may use it to meet their personal needs, and also if the spouse doesn't want you to support your parents, then one hides so that she can support her parents secretly without her spouse noticing." So all these taken together show that anecdotal evidence show that hidden income exists and it matters. Another reason why we have limited evidence on this topic is because by its definition, hidden income is difficult to measure. And that is why the existing small literature on this topic has predominantly used lab experiments. The drawback of this experimental approach, however, is that we still don't know whether household members hide income from one another in their everyday lives, and if so, what is the extent of such hiding and what are its consequences? This is where my paper comes in. Broadly speaking, my paper makes 3 contributions. The first contribution is a measurement one, so that is, do household members hide income from one another in their everyday lives? I developed a new method of measuring income hiding in a household survey. And I implement this method both in original data collection in Kenya, as well as using a nationally represented data in Indonesia. I show that household members hide up to 20% of income from one another on average, so hidden income is really a pervasive phenomenon in both of these countries. Next, I want to ask, why do people hide income, and what does that tell us about how households make decisions? I hypothesize that people hide income strategically. That is, people hide income because hiding and consuming these income on private goods, probably unobservably from other household members, is going to increase people's utility as compared to revealing their income and engaging in intra-household bargaining with the other household members. This means that cooperation in the household is actually partial and endogenous. That is, while household members do cooperate on observable resources, total resources are not efficiently allocated in the household. Lastly, why does hidden income matter? So I show that hidden income is associated with higher private goods consumption, that is, smoking or eating outside home and transferring to extended family. And this comes at the expense of the household spending less on food, especially protein-rich food. This potentially has negative consequences for children, both in the short term and in the long term, although there's also heterogeneity by gender. Specifically, I find that only when income is hidden from wives, girls and boys who grew up in these households are more likely to be underweight. When income is hidden from husbands, that is not correlated with worse child outcomes. So let me tell you a little bit more about the details. So in this paper, I'll use two data sources. One is primary data collection that I did in Kenya, and the other is Indonesia Family Life Survey, which is a nationally representative panel survey data in Indonesia. By using both of these using both of these data sources, the results complement each other because the results in the Kenya couple survey provides a cleaner identification of hiding, and results from the Indonesia Family Life Survey shows how pervasive hiding is and associates with child outcomes. So how do I measure hidden income? So basically, I elicit the same person's income multiple times, varying who answers the question and whether they answer privately. So in my Kenyan survey, I elicited income 3 times. First, I asked each person, how much did you make in the last 7 days over all your jobs? I also asked them, how much did your spouse make in the last 7 days over all their jobs? And when asked these questions, spouses are physically separated, so they cannot see or hear one another. At the end of the survey, the spouses are brought back together. So they sit right next to one another, and I ask them again, the exact same question, how much do you make over the last 7 days over all your jobs? So I hypothesized that if people hide income, then the spousal estimated income will be lower than their individually reported income in private, and their self-reported income when spouse is present will also be lower than their self-report in private. In the Indonesia Family Life Survey, I leveraged the fact that they also inadvertently asked income twice, once towards the individuals themselves and once to the household heads. So we have the individual reporting privately and someone else's reported income, but we don't necessarily have the self-report when a spouse is present. So what do I see? So first, this is just a graph of the raw data I had in Kenya. I find that respondents do underestimate spousal income and underreport income when spouse is present. So the red line here is the distribution of the self-reported income in private. So on average, the Kenyan respondents said that in the last 7 days, they earned about $22 or about 2,200 shillings. So this exact same respondents, when asked in the exact same setting, said that they earned 2,000 shillings on average when their spouse is present. And again, this is the same set of respondents, but when you ask their spouses, they said that they earned 1,600 shillings in the last 7 days on average. So using an OLS regression controlling for individual fixed effects, I find that on the average respondent in Kenya underestimates spousal income by 20% and underreports their own income by 17%. In Indonesia, the household head, on average, underestimates someone else's income by 9.6%. In terms of robustness checks, I use placebo questions to rule out that the results are driven by measurement error due to how questions are asked. I also rule out that people are misreporting to surveyors in order to conform to the male breadwinner norm, although I do not rule out that male breadwinner norm could be a mechanism behind why people hide. In the paper, I also rule out additional explanations, such as boasting, differential recall, differential response burden, and non-random selection of survey respondents. Now, due to time constraints, I'm going to skip the theory part and jump straight to the last part of the empirical part, that is why is measuring hidden income important. And here I'm going to focus using the Indonesian Family Life Survey because it collects more child outcomes and tracks them over time. So first, I find that hidden income is correlated with hidden private consumption. This is true in both Kenya and Indonesia. And in Indonesia specifically, when income is hidden, even on the household level, they spend more on tobacco and transfers to extended family. This comes at the expense of spending less on food, especially protein-rich food. And this is a concern because most low to middle income Indonesian families do not consume enough protein, and we may be particularly worried if low protein consumption leads to child malnutrition. Indeed, we find that in households where income is hidden from wives, we see that the children consume less protein-rich foods, and they're more likely to be underweight contemporaneously. These negative effects potentially persist in the long term. So using the panels data structure of these households, we can find these children when they're adults. Even as adults, girls who grew up in these households are 22% more likely to be underweight, and boys are 7% less likely to be employed. Now, in contrast, when income is hidden from husbands, we don't see any correlation with child outcomes. Interestingly, when either the husband or the wife hides income, the children themselves are more likely to hide their own income as adults when they grow up, suggesting that hidden income is also a norm that transmits across generations. Now you may wonder, are the effects of hidden income causal? In my data, hiding is an endogenous decision by individuals rather than experimentally induced. Actually, this theory specifically looks at this and looks at why individuals might make this decision of hiding. So it is possible for the effects of hidden income to reflect selection bias. For example, more selfish people are both more likely to hide, and they would invest less in children anyways, even if they don't hide income. So in this paper, I address this concern in two ways. One is I control for a large set of observables, including over 300 controls. That includes demographic controls, but also individual time and risk preferences, subjectively reported marital quality, as well as local marriage and gender norms. I find that controlling for selection for observables does very little to my OS coefficients. In addition, I use a bounding exercise that's developed by Oster 2019 and show that even selection on unobservables are unlikely to explain all of the results, as selection on unobservables must be stronger than selection on observables in order for them to explain this results on hiding. And lastly, I have a follow-up paper that's a different paper, but I'm also happy to talk about it, where I find that if I experimentally induce hiding in a lab and field experiment, I also see this effect that both husbands and wives hide, but only when husbands hide, they spend their unobservable income on private goods. So to conclude, I find that household members hide up to 20% of their employment income. Hidden income is correlated with unobservable private expenditures, and hidden income from wives is correlated with worse child outcomes. My paper provides a methodological contribution in that my research shows that our kind of state-of-the-art surveying one individual per household can actually lead to biased measurements of poverty and intra-household inequality. And lastly, my ongoing work continues to study the causes and consequences of intra-household hidden income and its policy implications. Thank you. And so on the slides are, I don't know if you can see it, but I have my email and website there where you can see the full paper, and you can contact me if you have any questions that I didn't get to answer in Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks. Perfect timing. So 5 minutes. Who's up first? Can you turn it on? Press the button.
Oh, hi. So this is Devaki. I'm at the World Bank Research Unit. Very interesting presentation. I was just wondering that if this hiding is so pervasive, how is it when the husband is predicting the wife's income or the wife is predicting the husband's income, they don't already suspect that they're hiding and actually bump up the income?
Yeah, of course. So the question is, if they're both hiding to one another, why wouldn't it be like, oh, I hide 20% income, so you must hide 20% income too. So when I estimate your income, I will actually just bump it up by 20%. So I actually see that partially. So remember that I had two measures of hiding. One is how much the spouse underestimates, and one is how much you underreport when the spouse is present. So if I divide the sample, this is only possible in a can sample, but if I divide it into two, one sample is those who actually change what they report they earn when their spouse is present, and the other is those who don't. So the ones that actually underreport their income when their spouse is present, they expect their spouses to hide. So when they estimate their spouse's income, it was actually higher than what the spouses reported. But the other group of respondents who don't actually, in this case, lie in front of their spouses, they don't expect their spouses to hide. But even the ones who did expect their spouses to hide and already adjusted their estimates, they adjusted too little.
Thank you for your excellent presentation and your bottom line message that household members hide up to 20% of their employment employment income. This is not surprising to me because one of the World Bank reports said that 43% of global bank accounts are dormant account due to there is no one to claim, and it was inactive because of their family members are not aware about that. So that means the size is very big. So my question to you is that have you done any kind of a relationship between the hidden income and women empowerment? If the household women are empowered enough, whether they are aware about their family income or whether the hidden size of the hidden income is less, or how different they are between rural and urban areas. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So unfortunately, in the data, I actually surprisingly don't find much heterogeneity. So at least just using the observable things we see in the data, they don't really predict hidden income, which is kind of surprising. So theoretically, I would say that on the one hand, I would expect people who are less empowered to hide more because they have more to gain by hiding and avoiding to share and bargain with their household members. On the other hand, if people are already less empowered, then having the option to hide could actually benefit them. Yeah, but I think it would be definitely an open question and would be great future research to study kind of the actual effect between empowerment and hidden income. I guess what I'm saying is in this project, this wasn't possible because our data on empowerment is also not that great.
Last one. Do you have any ones online?
No question from online yet.
So you get the last one.
So thank you for this. This is very interesting very interesting dynamics. My question is, like you mentioned that a portion of the hidden income is generally shared with the extended family members. And I see in the developing countries context, when the social safety is not a very formal but runs through informal channels, one of them is the support of the extended family. How do you see the implications of the paper in the general equilibrium setting? Like there are some implications, especially in terms of if there are some unexpected income shocks in future, then those investments are actually going to be beneficial for the welfare of the entire household. So do you have you explored this part, or otherwise this could be one of the suggestions to think about?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So I do find that hidden income is correlated with transfers to extended family, and at least part of that might actually be directed to children in extended families. So while I see that in some cases, hidden income within the household is correlated with less protein consumption of their own children, and it's actually correlated with more protein consumption of their nieces and nephews. So in a general equilibrium sense, it also depends on kind of when they hide income. So I have some evidence that people hide income, especially in positive shocks, or it's even possible that they only hide positive shocks. So in that case, hidden income does kind of serve both of these purposes. One is it helps them to consume more relative to their household members, but that also helps them to increase these inter-household transfers. So hidden income not only affects intra-household inequality, but can also affect inter-household inequality.
Thank you. I think we're running just in time for our next presentation. So this is Foreign Military Withdrawal, Male Migration, and Female Education by, you're already a doctor, Ahmad Shah, Mobariz, Postdoctoral Associate at the University of Pittsburgh.
This one?
Yeah. Well, thanks to SANEM and the World Bank for organizing such an amazing conference. I literally grew up with SANEM. It was the first time I met with SANEM was 2014, and here we are again. My name is Ahmad Shah Mobariz, and I'm a postdoctoral associate at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm also in the job market. So the paper that I'm presenting today is my job market paper. Well, we talk about shocks, and today I'm going to present a different shock in the context of South Asia, which is the U.S. foreign military withdrawal, the effect of U.S. military withdrawal on women's education during the 2011-2016 drawdown. All of us may have seen some news about the August of 2021 complete withdrawal of the U.S. forces from Afghanistan. We see two different dynamics. We see men running to the airport to get out of the country, and we see women running to the streets of Kabul to demand rights for education. So we already see two different behaviors as a result of the withdrawal. But what I'm presenting today is not the August of 2021. It is the drawdown of troops that started in 2011. To give you a broad scope, since the 1960s, there have been at least 115 foreign occupations. For example, 1967 occupation of North Cyprus in Turkey, occupation of Transnistria region in Moldova, and the occupation of parts of Syria by the US. And of course, recent occupation of Ukraine by Russia. And depending on how long the occupants or the occupying forces are there, occupations create new opportunities and new threats. For example, in Afghanistan, as a result of US military invasion, Taliban were wiped out, and then it brought women and minorities to the fore. And then collapse of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath regime in Iraq brought the Shia religious group to power. So it created new dynamics. Depending on how long foreign forces remain in a country, withdrawal also creates, is an economic and political shock. There are some evidences on macroeconomic effects of base closures in general, that base closures do reduce employment, do increase unemployment, and reduce income. But the effects of withdrawals on social aspects such as education is scant. So my research question in this paper is, what are the effects of foreign military withdrawal on females' demand for higher education? Why I focus on demand? Because it measures actual participation. In the research context is in the setting of the US-NATO military drawdown during the 2011-2016 from Afghanistan. And I employ an instrumental variable approach to tease out the treatment effect. To give you a preview of my results, just in case I don't get to my results at the end, is that military withdrawal increased female participation in higher education at that time because the regime was still in place and women could participate in higher education. There were no significant changes in male participation. On the contrary, and I show that the increase was due to a reduction in income, and because women who worked with the international NGOs lost jobs, and their next best option was to invest in their human capital. On the contrary, men had an option to get out of the country, and in tandem with the refugee crisis in Europe, we see that there is a massive outflow of migrants, young migrants from Afghanistan. I don't want to talk about the contribution. So to give you a context, as a result of 9/11 terrorist attacks in the US intervened in Afghanistan to knock out the Taliban. They remained until 2010. In 2011, once the Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan, the US decides to withdraw, right, or reduce the number of troops on the ground. For the withdrawal, they announced a phased-out approach where the security responsibilities of a group of districts were handed over to local allies in cohorts. And this transition concluded in 2014. Security transition and actual military withdrawal are two different phases. Security transition is the step where the security responsibilities of districts are handed over to local allies. In the second stage, once security responsibility is handed over, then the foreign military physically withdraw from districts. Withdrawal of troops, for the withdrawal of troops, there were several barriers. One of the main barriers were logistical barriers, because Afghanistan is topographically a hard country, and there were 114,000 troops on the ground, $36 billion worth of equipment stretched across Afghanistan's districts. Getting them out was not an easy way. So we see that there is a gap between actual announcement there's a gap between announcement and actual withdrawal of troops. On average, there are 13 months gap. And I show that the logistical hubs, distance between districts, and one of the 10 logistical hubs that the US Army used for evacuation of troops determine the withdrawal process. So the US Army and NATO in general chose an outside-in approach, meaning that they first started withdrawal from remote areas first, and then focused on less accessible areas to meet the deadline. So there is an inverse relationship between the distance from districts and one of the 10 mega logistical hubs. Okay, this picture shows the 5 transition cohorts between 2011 and 2016. And this second picture is actually the underlying causal identification for my empirical strategy. As that you see on the left, you see the withdrawal time relative to the announcement. And on the right, you see the least traveled path between districts and one of the 10 mega logistical hubs that the US Army used for evacuation, right? We see that there's an inverse relationship. The less accessible the area, the further is the withdrawal time. The further the distance between the districts and one of the 10 logistical hubs, the faster is the withdrawal, right? So basically, you will withdraw from remote areas first and then come slowly to the more accessible areas. This is what I use as an instrumental variable for my identification. Data comes from various sources. The first data is the Afghanistan's university entrance examination, which is an enumeration of all students participating in the university entrance between 2003 and 2019. I aggregate this data at the district level. The second data comes from the survey of the Afghan people collected by the Asia Foundation, again, aggregated at the district. Transition comes from NATO, and this security data comes from ACLED. And withdrawal distance measure comes from another paper that was published in 2021. So I combine all of these data based on district names and GPS coordinates. The variable of interest is, the outcome variable of interest is participation in higher education, is the total number of students per capita participating in higher education at the district level. The independent variable or the endogenous variable is military withdrawal. It is a binary variable that is equal to 1 when the last military base in the district was either closed or handed over to the local security forces. The instrumental variable, the one instrument of interest, is distance. Distance between districts and one of the 10 logistical military hubs, measured by least cost travel path. So in the first stage, I estimate the probability of withdrawal between 2011 and 2015 on distance from military hubs. I interacted with the variable post because before 2011, the distance was irrelevant, all right? In the second stage, I estimate the actual outcome, which is the participation in higher education, using the predicted withdrawal. I find that in my first stage, I show there's a strong correlation between distance from military hubs and military withdrawal. In the second stage, for male, we don't see any effect, but for female, there's a significant positive relationship between participation and withdrawal. Just to show you, I don't want to go through the robustness, but I want to talk about mechanisms. In my mechanism, I show that the main mechanism was, as a result of military withdrawal, there was withdrawal of resources as well. And that withdrawal of resources meant a reduction in income for the household. And that reduction in income left women with deciding between doing nothing and investing on their human capital for the future. Women go for higher education, and men, I show that there is a negative effect of withdrawal on women's migration perception. It is a self-reported measure of when do you plan to, if you are given a chance, would you decide to migrate to another country? So the twin peak or the twin effect for male and female behavior is evident in my findings. I don't want to go through to the details of how I estimate the mediation effect, as just to tell you the story is that as a result of withdrawal, there was an income, it was basically an income shock, and it led to migration of men and investment in human capital of women. I explore other mechanisms such as increase in violence. I don't see any effect of violence. I also see that supply side. If there was an expansion of university seats as a result, I don't see that the number of seats increased, so that women would participate more. So, in conclusion, as a result of foreign military withdrawal during the 2011-2016, women participated in higher education more. Men, on the contrary, migrated from the country, and it is the income channel that explains my result. Thank you.
Right on time. Questions? Hands up. None? Go for it. I'm region to progression.
No, because they want to hear.
Oh, thank you very much for this presentation. Maybe I didn't capture all the details, but my question is that how did you take into account of maybe the historical trend of higher female participation in education before the event? For example, even after the withdrawal, there higher attendance at school, but actually it's still below the expected level, considering the historical trend. Thank you.
Yeah, I do add differences to see the pre-trend. The trend, I don't see any trend between earlier withdrawal districts and later withdrawal districts.
Thank you for the paper. Really interesting one. I think simple first question about, so this distance measure is a nice instrument that you have used. But I wonder, because there is a reason, right, why, I mean, but inherently, districts which are close to the, let's say, the military base would have different characteristics compared to, like, let's say, some districts which are remote, like, you know, close to the mountain and everything. So it would be very important, of course, to control for all this geographical or district fixed effect. But at the same time, there might be changes within this district that is happening from 2011 till or whatever time they left. So is there a way you can control for that fact, I wonder? Because you see the results in terms of male not getting higher education could be nicely explained by they could be recruited more by the Talibans. But then again, this recruitment could be higher in the closer districts in the male base camp, but not the other way around for females. So I wonder what's going on there. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. These military bases are different from commercial airports, for example. At least 5 out of these 10 military hubs were in very remote areas. They became relevant during 2011 because I didn't get to the there in the presentation. 2 months before the withdrawal was started, Pakistan closed the southern supply network because as a result of a mistake, a drone attack by the US Army killed some Pakistani soldiers on the ground. So they suddenly closed the border. At the same time, Uzbekistan in the north, they closed supply of certain equipments, transfer of certain equipments from Afghanistan to the north. So the local logistical hubs became suddenly relevant for the evacuation of troops. And to your point, I do use other measures for distance from commercial airports as another candidate for a potential instrument. I don't see a correlation.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm Bhargav, a graduate student at American University. My question is, the increase in demand for the higher education might have been driven by the expectation that the more conservative government, more conservative power at the helm would, they might have expected that would further restrict their rights with respect to education. So irrespective of military exit or military withdrawal, if there would have been expectation of more liberal government coming to the power, that might not have increased the demand? Do you think of expectation here?
Could be, but again, there is another paper that shows that the districts didn't fall, right? At the conflict, at least during the transition, there was not an increase in conflict, right? So I wouldn't see a reason why people would expect that the districts would fall. But that is something that I cannot measure in the data, unfortunately. Right.
I think we'll save the 1 minute for the next set of questions. Unless there's a pressing one. Anything from... No, great.
I can ask a question. So, like,
but you have like 10 seconds.
Yeah. So following the question you received, like, I think the human capital investment increases when one expects to get benefit from it in the longer term. So probably that's why women are investing, right?
Sure. We have evidence from recession and the World War in the US and other places that people tend to invest in their human capital when they face less of economic opportunities at that time.
Great, thank you. So to our last paper, Dr. Mahtab Uddin, from a PhD candidate, at the Global Development Institute at the University of Manchester, Dynamics of International Migration, Remittances, and Inequality in Rural Bangladesh. This one?
Yeah.
And same as your colleagues.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mahtab Uddin, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Manchester. I come from across the Atlantic. So, yeah. So, yeah, the topic I'm going to talk about, it's pretty common, and some of you might think it like a common knowledge, but there's certain dynamics that I really want to look into. So overall, it's the dynamics of migration, remittances, and inequality in Bangladesh, or more specifically, rural Bangladesh. As you understand, and as you know, that migration households actually perceive it as a strategy for their diversification of their income or in the face of any shock. So, and papers, the impact of migration on poverty, is well-founded. There's hundreds of papers who show it reduces poverty. But the impact on inequality, there ambiguity. Some papers, they show it decreases inequality, some papers shows it increases inequality, and some shows there's an inverse relationship. And there are papers like Stark, Jones, Taylor, they argue that, it depends on the country, and the relationship, actually, it will depend the stages of migration and how developed the migration networks and all that. So given this context, actually, I really want to investigate how it is, the dynamics in the context of Bangladesh. There are several reasons behind it. Bangladesh is one of the largest remittance receiving country in the world. And despite the impact of remittances impact on reducing poverty in Bangladesh, we see that there are inequality on the rise. And there's a couple of papers who argue that, like, for example, Osmani and Zen, based on their descriptive analysis, they argued that it could be attributed to the foreign remittance in the country. And also another thing is that, there are high degree of spatial disparity when you talk about the international migration in Bangladesh. Between 2005 and 2019, Bangladesh sent almost 9 million migrant workers globally. And about 50% of them only come from 10 districts in Bangladesh. We have 64 districts in the country. And majority of them, they actually come from 3 divisions, Dhaka, Chattogram, and Sylhet. So you see, they come from the more richer regions, more monies are putting into those regions. So one of my topic was like also investigating, I'm not showing that here, like how the regional disparity actually widening over time. So just to give it the context, like, if you see that, the first one on the Gini and the migration and the districts, some districts have very large volume of migrant workers. In the Gini, the relationship is like a curvy one, but in the case of poverty, it's kind of declining trend. But we'll get into that in So in this presentation, what I'm going to show is what drives, there are many things that I'm doing, but a couple of I'll be discussing here. What drives the new international migration in Bangladesh, understanding the impacts of migration and remittances on inequality at the source communities and their overtime dynamics, and also how does migration change a household's income decile, like what happens when there is a failed migration, that is the impact of returning migrants on household welfare. My data, it comes from the Bangladesh Integrated Household Survey, a fascinating data set. It covers almost 18,545 households from 3 rounds, 2012, 2015, and 2018. I'm incorporating all of them. So as I said, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the migration in Bangladesh, what drives. So I did the panel probit. I also did the panel IV probit, but the results remain almost similar. I also investigated the impact of migration remittances on inequality at the source community. So I employ linear regression models with district fixed effect and ER fixed effects. Our dependent variable in that case remains the Gini or Guinea. So our base year there is 2012. And we also see how does migration change the household's income decile and what happens when a failed migration occurs. That is impact of return migrants on the overall welfare, or the ladder, standing ladder on the income decile. And we also do the inequality dynamics, doing some instrumental variable quantile selection model, but I'm not going to do that here. I'm running millions of regressions. I'm really frustrated with that, but I'll go to a couple of them here. So who migrates? So this is from our panel regression. So, and just we have some conventional variables, but the variables that I want to highlight, there are a couple of, for example, as I said, there is regional disparity. So as you can see, the people from Borishal divisions or Rangpur divisions, Rangpur is the poorest division in Bangladesh. So, and if you are from there, your probability to be a new migrant significantly goes down. These are the coefficient, not the marginal effects. So I'm not showing the marginal effects. So this is not the probability, direct probability. It shows the, the coefficient parameters from the probability estimation. And we have there are a couple of variables we take from the lag, for example, whether the international migrant household dummy from lag 1. So if the household has international migrant in the previous lag, the probability goes up. They will have higher probability to migrate. If they are internal migrant, the probability we can't see the significance, but there's a negative association. Proportion of males in the household. So there are papers who argue that if you have more male members, working age male members in your household, the probability will go up. Happens with us as well. Proportion of international migrant household at the district level. So in a district, if there are 100 households and there are 20 households who have at least one international migrant, the proportion would be 20%. So if a district has higher proportion of migrant workers or a more strong migration network, the probability goes up. And we also take whether the household had the loans in a lag 1. So it gives you the understanding like whether they had kind of the borrowing constraint or not, whether they had the total loan of total savings, all those have positive relationship. And if you see the quantile standing of the households, we see that, households, these are the quantile from the previous round. So if your household belongs to the upper quantiles, then your probability to migrate in the next round goes up. So anyway, so let's go on to the relationship between inequality and migration. So as I said, we have 3 rounds. First, 2012. This is from the district. And on the x-axis, it shows the proportion of the household with at least one international migrant. On the y-axis, we have consumption Guinea. In 2012, it shows a kind of upwardish. 2015, it's kind of a curvy one. 2018, it goes down. So just take it a bit slow. So you will see that in the initial one, we have lots of households with lower proportion of migrants. It goes, some households turns this on this way. And in the next round, more households becoming, as the migration network is developing, more households, more proportion of households with international migrant going up. So just to relate to it with how it helps. So we ran a fixed effect model with the region fixed effect. In the region fixed effect, we also did with the village fixed effects, and the results almost remain the same. It shows, when the in 2018 actually compared to the 2012, the inequality goes down, and the proportion of migrant households at the district level, it tend to increase your inequality level. So just to correlate with this one, so we have, you see in 2012, if this is the district level, constant proportion of the households with at least one migrant member at the district level. So in the in 2012, and the poorest decile, only 3.8% of the households had at least one migrant member. You see, in 2015, it goes up to 4.5%. In 2018, it jumps to almost 9%. And you will also see, what I want to say is that proportion of migrant members from the poorer deciles, they are joining in the migration process. This could be due to the, as the Stark or Jones, they argue that stages of migration, they tend to reduce the inequality over time. That could be the case. Now we go down to the shifts in the deciles. So what happens to those who fails in migration? So you see, migration, it's not always rosy. In Bangladesh, you take loans to migrate. And you sometimes, when you fail, it's kind of falling from the sky. So those who fail to migrate, what happens to those households? So we are calling it like decile shifts. How we call it? Decile shift is a decile shift of household I in year T is equals to decile of that household I in year T divided by decile of household I in T minus 1. So if it is 1, that means your decile didn't change between the rounds. If it is more than 1, you have jumped up the ladder. You belong to a upper income decile. If it is below 1, it means you have fallen down the ladder. So let's see what happens. And this is what happens. So if you have international migrant in leg 1, and that is successful migrant, in that case, you will jump up the ladder. So you see, I did this regression separately for 2015 and 2018. There are reasons for that. But in 2015, if you see that 2015, it goes up. But if you have, if the household have loans in the previous loan, you are, the proportionate change in decile shift, it goes down. And if the household have returnee household dummy, that means if the household member returned to the household in this round, excluding the homesickness or whether the contract has ended. So it has the household returnee dummy, it has the variables like, it has the variables, it considers the job loss or the recession or sudden, coming back to the country. So it shows that if the household has a returnee dummy, the proportionate change in decile shift, it goes down. So they fall down the decile ladder. So I'm not going to show the quantile IV. So let me conclude. In other words, what are our preliminary results actually showing that the existence of stages of migration and unequal dynamics in rural Bangladesh. We find that households with less borrowing constraint and more access to the migration network or income status in the previous rounds, that actually include the probability to be a new migrant. We also find that, the reason the lower people from the lower income decile, they get on the migration ladder, because this could be due to the cost of migration falling, a reduction in the asymmetry of information, or having more market access or networking. And it could be, we also see that, the failed migration actually causes the households to move below the decile ranking of the households. Let me conclude. I have many remediations that I'm, addressing every day, and I'll be addressing. So thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. We're going sufficiently on time, so there's time for questions. Anybody in the room? Sorry, all the way to the back.
So, very interesting presentation. I had a question on the evidence that inequality has been going down, inequality related to migration. And obviously one reason which you cited is the direct impact, in the sense that more people from poorer families are getting the opportunity to migrate, and therefore remittance incomes are coming to their families. But I was also wondering about the incomes which come to the more well-off families and the way that income is spent. So is it possible that in the past more was spent on consumption, and now in recent years more is being spent on productive activities or entrepreneurial activities, which are actually creating opportunities for members of the lower income groups, and therefore they're benefiting indirectly from the incomes earned by migrants from more well-off families? So you mentioned the more direct impact, and I was speculating about a possible indirect impact and whether that has changed over time.
Oh, thank you so much. Actually, I think there are. Particularly, I didn't show it here, but the per capita household level consumption expenditure. The way we did it, Gini, it was the total consumption expenditure, not the per capita household consumption expenditure. So if you look at the per capita household consumption expenditure, that actually widened between the income deciles of the households from 2012 to 2015 to 2018. So households who has both international migrant and domestic migrant, or both migrants, they are substantially richer than the households who doesn't have any migrant members. So it has gone up. Also, another thing I want to point out is that there are what happens with the migration over time. You see, in all the rounds, the proportion of migrants from the richest decile, like on the 10th decile, it was more than 20%, 25%, 28%, or close to 38%. So it has been the trend. But as I say, like with the time, the cost of migration, asymmetry of information, those are also lowering down. But I'm in my another paper, I'm seeing the impact on the intra-household distribution. So perhaps I would be able to look into your comment there, like where there is any change over time in terms of like outcome, in terms of health outcomes, or the other dimensions. Yeah, thank you.
You talked about like you are using an IV at some point. What is the IV you are using?
The IV I use, it is the the migration network. So the way I measured is but let me tell you one thing. I'm very critical about IV, and I know people who says like IV is nothing. Like I mean, it doesn't exist. It should not exist. So the IV I use, it was the migration network, and I use the proportion of the, as you said, the proportion of the households with at least one international migrant at the district level. So yeah.
Yeah, like I have like so many critics, but I not go there because of these sort of IVs are very problematic.
Yeah.
But you're also using like household fixed effects, right? So
not the household one. I'm using the district or the village fixed effect.
Using it as a panel data.
I'm using it as panel data.
Okay.
But when I'm doing it, like the in my fixed effect models, I use the. Let me hear you first, okay?
Because like the assets or the history of a household, high level of migration has arisen because there's a history dependence, like the network that you will be exploring as an instrument, or maybe not. But the history of migration from a district influences whether more people will be migrated or not. And at the same time, household asset influences who is going to migrate and who is not going to migrate, right? So if you do not control household level fixed effect, you're not controlling for household level assets.
One thing I did control I didn't explain that. I control for the household total amount of land that they hold and the price of it. So that I believe that will capture substantially, because that's the only in the previous, in the leg one, what was the total land volume or value of the household that they had? Okay.
I have a subsequent question. Like I looked at the data and it has only small proportion of households having an international migrant. So what proportion of households have international migrants in your data?
I would not say it is small. If you say V1, V2, I know you are working with this. So if you look at the V1, V2, V3, and V4, so sections, then you will find the I have almost from the 3 rounds 1,500 or 1,600. So that's not less actually. That's lot of observations. Okay. So but the internal migrant, we have almost 2,500 observations. So it's, I guess, large.
Because I'm asking that question because the issues of remittance creating dependence in a household could also affect, like some people might not supply labor because of the dependence created by the income.
I'm looking into that as well. So yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? There's one. Okay.
One from the chat box. Mr. Kamulbari says that what about the previous household income on the current ones as he has written? Did you consider changes in experience and level of education, and increase the number of earning members?
I did, all of them. So the answer is quite straightforward. Yeah, in my regressions, I had the number of earning member at the household. I had whether the female household member he's an earner. I also had variables like the household head education. You see the new economics of labor migration. It says migration is a household decision. So what I did, my regressions are at the household level, not the individual level. So it is not the individual who is migrating. It's the household's decision whether they will have a new migrant in this period or not. And that's what I did. Yeah, thank you.
Great. And with that, we have 1 minute to spare, and we're going to let everybody take a break for that minute. Thank you very much.
Next session is on trade and development.